Picture this. You're 17, ambitious, and on the edge of adulthood. You've worked hard all year, survived exam season, and summer has finally arrived like a long-awaited breath of fresh air. You're heading to Los Angeles with your best friend, ready to make memories before college apps consume your life. But you have no idea that a storm is about to hit mid-air, and you're at the center of it. Ava Carter pulled her suitcase through the gleaming halls of JFK Airport with the kind of ease that comes from familiarity. Airports weren't daunting to her. They were fascinating intersections of stories, goodbyes, beginnings. This morning, though, something felt especially significant. It wasn't just any trip. This one was a birthday gift from her father, a gesture wrapped in love and luxury. He'd surprised her with first-class tickets aboard Skybridge Airlines, an international carrier known for its comfort service and growing reputation in the aviation world. What the public didn't know, however, was that her father, Jackson Carter, wasn't merely its CEO. He was the majority owner. His journey to the top had been far from easy. Ava had heard it all her life, how he'd juggled night shifts and college courses, surviving off vending machine snacks and borrowed textbooks. He hadn't inherited success. He'd built it one late night and boardroom pitch at a time. Skybridge wasn't just a company, it was his legacy. And Ava, she was its future. But you'd never guess any of that from how she carried herself that day. In faded jeans, sneakers, and a clean black jacket, Ava blended in with the thousands of other travelers. She didn't wear designer logos or flaunt privilege. Her father had taught her better. Be kind, be grounded, and no matter how high you fly, remember where the runway is. She carried those words like armor. Security was a breeze. She offered a smile to every TSA agent, a thank you to the woman checking IDs. She liked to imagine where everyone else was going. Were they traveling home, chasing dreams, escaping something? There was something beautiful in the anonymity of it all. Her boarding pass said 3A, a window seat in first class. She smiled to herself. It still felt surreal. Though she'd flown first class before, it was never something she took for granted. Every trip reminded her of the sacrifices behind it all, the weekends her dad missed family dinners, the nights she'd fall asleep outside his office, waiting for him to come home. This seat was more than a perk. It was a symbol of everything they'd overcome together. And yet, as she approached the gate, the warmth in her chest began to chill. The gate agent, a tall man with graying temples and a clipped demeanor, eyed her the way some people look at a misplaced item, curious, slightly annoyed, and certain it doesn't belong. His name tag read Reynolds, and his eyes didn't smile when his lips did. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, his tone more suspicious than courteous. "Yes," Ava said, her voice as steady as she could make it. "I'm on Flight 86 to Los Angeles." She handed him her boarding pass. She expected a routine scan, maybe a polite "enjoy your flight." Instead, he scrutinized the screen for far too long, his eyebrow arching like punctuation at the end of a loaded sentence. "You're in first class," he said slowly, almost as if he were challenging her to correct him. "Yes," she replied calmly. "Seat 3A." He looked at her again, then back at the pass. No smile, no warmth, just boarding hasn't started. "Wait over there." No welcome, no acknowledgement, nothing but a dismissive nod. Ava took a breath. Maybe he was just having a bad day. Maybe she was imagining it. But the sting of suspicion hung in the air like static. She stepped aside, clutching her carry-on a little tighter, a little closer. She reminded herself of her father's advice: you don't need to prove yourself to anyone, but you do need to hold your head high. So she did. What she didn't know, though, what she couldn't possibly know, was that this moment was only the beginning. The minutes passed slowly. As more passengers arrived and gathered near the gate, Ava tried to shake off the strange tension. She sipped from her water bottle, scrolled idly on her phone, and reminded herself that she was here to relax. She had an exciting trip ahead. She had her boarding pass. She belonged here. But when boarding for first class was announced, the feeling returned sharp and unwelcome. As Ava stepped forward to join the small line of first-class passengers, she caught a few glances. Some were indifferent, some were blank, but others lingered just a second too long. A man in a tailored navy suit looked her up and down, then looked away. A woman in designer heels shifted slightly, clutching her bag a little closer. It wasn't overt. No one said anything, but Ava had felt it before, the silent question hovering in the air. "Do you belong here?" The same gate agent Reynolds didn't even glance at her this time. Another staff member, a younger woman with a bright smile, took her boarding pass and scanned it. "Welcome aboard, Miss Carter," she said. Ava smiled and nodded, grateful for the small kindness. As she stepped into the aircraft, the scent of polished leather and lavender disinfectant greeted her. The first-class cabin gleamed with modern elegance, wide seats, ambient lighting, and calm efficiency. A tall man in a crisp grey suit adjusted his cuffs in seat 1A. Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman in pearls skimmed through a fashion magazine. Ava moved forward confidently, heading to her seat 3A by the window. "Good morning, Miss Carter," came a voice. A flight attendant stood just ahead, name tag glinting Sandra. She was in her mid-40s, perfectly groomed, her expression a picture of polite professionalism. But as she laid eyes on Ava, something flickered. Her gaze paused as if momentarily confused. Then, as if catching herself, she smiled quickly, too quickly, and held out a warm towel. "Welcome aboard. May I help you find your seat? I'm in 3A. Ava replied, showing her ticket. Sandra gestured with a practiced hand. "Right this way." Ava thanked her, then made her way to the seat and settled in. The leather was buttery soft, the armrest gleamed, and the legroom was vast. Still, she couldn't relax. Something about Sandra's momentary double-take stayed with her. As more passengers boarded, Ava tucked her carry-on neatly overhead and retrieved her headphones. She scrolled through the in-flight entertainment system, choosing a documentary about ocean wildlife. Maybe some beautiful shots of coral reefs and humpback whales would ease her nerves. Just before takeoff, Sandra reappeared standing by Ava's seat with a poised smile. "Can I get you something to drink before we depart? Orange juice, please," Ava said. Sandra nodded and returned moments later with a glass, setting it on Ava's tray table, with a folded napkin, brisk, efficient, not unfriendly, but also not quite warm. Ava thanked her and sipped slowly, trying not to read too much into the interaction. Then came the hum of the engines, the familiar mechanical symphony as the plane taxied to the runway. As the aircraft picked up speed, Ava closed her eyes for a moment. She loved this part, the lift, the sensation of weightlessness, the blur of the world shrinking beneath her. And yet, even as they climbed into the sky, something still felt heavy. She couldn't put her finger on it, but it was there. A little while after takeoff, when the seatbelt sign switched off, Ava decided to stretch her legs. She walked to the lavatory near the front of the plane. On her way back, she caught sight of Sandra whispering to a male flight attendant whose name tag read Eric. As Ava approached, both looked up too quickly. Their eyes followed her for just a moment too long. She returned to her seat, headphones in hand, heart thudding a little faster. It wasn't just her imagination anymore. Something was off. She scrolled through the entertainment options again, selecting a new documentary. But before it even began, Sandra returned, this time without a drink or smile. "Miss Carter," she said, her voice taut, "we need to see your boarding pass again." Ava blinked, startled. "Of course," she said, reaching into her purse. "Is something wrong? We're verifying first-class passengers." "Just a routine check," Sandra said flatly, though her tone didn't feel routine at all. Ava handed over the pass and watched as Sandra examined it with exaggerated scrutiny, as if expecting it to vanish into dust. Then came the question that made Ava's stomach turn. "Where did you get this ticket?" It wasn't a question. It was an accusation dressed up as curiosity. Ava frowned. "My dad booked it for me. I printed it at home." Why Sandra didn't answer immediately. She looked over the pass again, then finally handed it back. "We're confirming passenger credentials, company policy." Ava offered her ID to be thorough. Sandra barely glanced at it before walking away. Ava sat in silence, her fingers trembling slightly. She tried to focus on the screen in front of her, but the pit in her stomach had deepened. This flight was no longer just a vacation. Something was about to go very wrong. The hum of the engine was no longer soothing. It was a background growl to Ava's racing thoughts. She stared at the blank screen in front of her, her orange juice untouched, her pulse steady only in appearance. Beneath the surface, everything felt like it was unraveling. Moments passed. She hoped, maybe prayed, that Sandra's behavior had just been a fluke. But then, just as she was about to pick up her headphones again, she spotted a movement in the aisle that made her stomach drop. Sandra was back, and this time she wasn't alone. Behind her walked the same gate agent from earlier, Reynolds. He should have been back at the airport by now. Gate agents didn't travel with passengers, so why was he here? Ava's heart rate kicked up a notch. The two stopped by her seat. Passengers around her stirred subtly heads, turning shoulders shifting. Even without speaking, the situation screamed, "Something's wrong." Miss Carter Reynolds said, his voice dripping with false calm, "We need to have a quick word." Ava paused her screen and removed her headphones. "Is there a problem?" Reynolds didn't answer. He held out a hand. "Your ID and boarding pass again, please." Again, Ava hesitated but complied. She handed them over, voice tinged with confusion and the first stirrings of anger. "I already showed these to the flight attendant, twice." "We've noticed a discrepancy," Reynolds replied, flipping through her documents like he was looking for a missing clue. "We have reason to believe the ticket may have been purchased fraudulently." Ava's jaw dropped. "What? That's not true. My father booked it. He used his credit card. I have the confirmation here." She fumbled in her purse, retrieving a printed email with the full itinerary. Reynolds glanced at the document, then scoffed under his breath. "The name on the credit card isn't yours," he said. "Of course not." Ava snapped, incredulous. "I'm 17. My dad paid for it." "That's not unusual." He looked up, unconvinced. "Do you have documentation proving your relationship to this man?" Ava blinked. "What? That's absurd. No one carries their birth certificate to get on a plane." "It's about security," Sandra interjected. "We need to confirm that you're not traveling under someone else's credentials." "This is a direct flight," Ava argued, her voice rising. "I've already shown my ID and my boarding pass." "You've got everything you need," Ma'am Reynolds said with a forced sigh. "We'll need you to come to the front galley to sort this out away from the other passengers." The phrase felt like a punch. Away from the other passengers, like she was a problem to be discreetly removed. The cabin was no longer just watching, they were fully tuned in. Faces peeked over headrests. Conversations had ceased. Ava could feel every eye on her, every breath holding in the stillness. She stood slowly, suppressing the tremble in her limbs. Her legs didn't feel steady. She was burning inside, torn between fear and defiance. She thought about her father, how many times he'd told her to stay calm in conflict, and how many times he'd also said, "Don't let them treat you like you're less than what you are." Reynolds led the way with Sandra close behind. Ava followed, her fingers balled into fists at her sides. As they passed the curtain into the front galley, the air seemed colder, tighter, as though she had entered enemy territory. They cornered her just out of sight from the cabin. Ava turned to face them. "I don't understand why this is happening," she said. "I haven't done anything wrong. I have a valid ticket. Why are you targeting me?" Reynolds crossed his arms. "There's been a rise in fraudulent tickets in first class. We have to investigate any irregularities." "But there's no irregularity," Ava shot back. "I've given you everything: boarding pass, ID, purchase email, which can be forged," Sandra added curtly. "My father is Jackson Carter," Ava said suddenly, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "He's the CEO of Skybridge Airlines. He booked this flight for me." "Look it up." The silence was immediate and thick. Reynolds blinked. Sandra tilted her head, skeptical. "Jackson Carter." Reynolds echoed like he hadn't heard the name before, or maybe didn't want to believe it. "So now you're claiming to be the CEO's daughter?" "Yes," Ava said firmly, "and if you just let me make a call, just one call, I can clear all of this up in seconds." But neither of them moved. Their faces remained cold, dismissive. "If Mr. Carter were your father," Sandra said slowly, "I'm sure he would have informed the staff. He wouldn't leave things to chance." Ava clenched her jaw. "Or maybe he believed your airline would do what it promises: treat every passenger with dignity." Reynolds scoffed and stepped closer. "Until you can provide definitive proof, we'll have to reassign your seat, or prepare for disembarkation at the next stop." "There is no next stop," Ava said through gritted teeth. "It's a direct flight." "That can change," he replied. Her mind was spinning. She could feel panic climbing her throat, but she pushed it down. "No tears. Not yet." "Let me speak to him," she said again. "That's all I'm asking." But Reynolds had already turned away, signaling someone beyond the curtain. They weren't listening. They didn't want to. And that's when Ava realized this wasn't just about a ticket. This was about power, about who they thought belonged, about who they thought she was. And she was about to show them exactly who she was. As Ava stood in the cramped galley, something inside her shifted. The disbelief was still there. How could it not be? But it had been joined by a rising fire, the kind that came from years of watching how the world treated people who looked like her, the kind that remembered every slight, every sideways glance, every "are you sure you belong here?" And now it was front and center, daring her to fold or to fight. "I'm not moving anywhere," she said, her voice low but unwavering, "and you don't have the right to lay a hand on me." Reynolds's lips tightened into a hard line. "Ma'am, we're asking you to cooperate. If you refuse, we'll treat it as non-compliance and escalate accordingly." "What are you escalating?" Ava challenged. "You've already humiliated me in front of the entire cabin, accused me without proof, and now you're threatening me for standing up for myself." The tension crackled like a live wire. Just then, Eric, the younger flight attendant, poked his head through the curtain. His expression was tense, his eyes flicking between Ava and the two senior crew members. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, though his voice said he already knew it wasn't. "We're handling it," Sandra snapped, but Eric didn't back away. He looked at Ava, then at the bruise already beginning to form on her arm, where Reynolds had grabbed her earlier. "Passengers are starting to notice," Eric said carefully. "There are phones out. I suggest we proceed very carefully." Reynolds growled under his breath. "Fine. Miss Carter, do you have any message, email, or text that can verify your identity?" Ava nearly sagged with relief. Yes, I do." She reached into her pocket and retrieved her phone. It was still in airplane mode, of course, but she had saved screenshots. She swiped quickly to her photo gallery and pulled up the image, a message thread labeled Dad with flight details, seat number, and the timestamp from the night before. "Here, look. My dad sent me all this." Sandra peered at the screen but didn't take the phone. Anyone can label a contact Dad. Ava's jaw clenched. "Then look at this." She swiped again, pulling up a forwarded email from Jackson Carter's official Skybridge Airlines address. The header showed his name, title, and corporate signature. The email detailed her booking, complete with confirmation codes and seat assignment. Reynolds didn't even glance at it. "Fake emails aren't hard to create," he muttered, folding his arms. Ava's temper flared. "Seriously, you're ignoring every shred of proof I'm giving you. You want to believe I don't belong here, and no evidence is going to change your mind, is it?" Before Reynolds could answer, a new voice broke in. "What's going on here?" It was Linda, the senior flight attendant, with a no-nonsense presence and a silver streak in her hair. She took in the scene in a heartbeat. Ava's shaking shoulders, the raised voices, the unmistakable heat in the air. Sandra spoke first. "This passenger claims to be Jackson Carter's daughter, but we have no solid verification." Linda frowned. "Why don't we just call corporate VIPs? Can be verified in minutes." Ava nearly collapsed with relief. "Thank you. Please, just call them." Reynolds scowled. "We're not wasting corporate time on this. You already have," Linda said, voice cool, "and it's going to look a lot worse if we don't resolve this quickly and properly." Reynolds looked like he was about to explode. But before he could say another word, a passenger's voice rang out from beyond the curtain. "Excuse me." It was the man in seat 1A. Tall, silver hair, serious voice. "I'm an attorney. I've been recording this incident since the moment you began harassing her. If you touch her again without just cause, you'll be facing a lawsuit so fast your head will spin." Reynolds froze. More voices joined in. "She's a kid," someone shouted. "Let her call her dad. This is unacceptable. She hasn't done anything wrong." And just like that, the tide turned. Reynolds turned red. Sandra looked stricken. Even Eric took a step back. Ava, still holding her phone, stared at Linda. "Please," she whispered. "Can I make the call now?" Linda gave a firm nod. "We'll make the call," Sandra huffed. "We don't allow cell signals in flight." "I'm not using a cell signal," Ava shot back. "I'll use Wi-Fi. Or the flight phone, whatever it takes." Reynolds muttered something unintelligible, but Linda had already made her decision. She stepped toward the cockpit door and picked up the crew phone. "This is Linda Harrison, lead flight attendant, on Flight 806 to Los Angeles. We need to verify a VIP passenger urgently. Her name is Ava Carter. She claims to be the daughter of Jackson Carter." A pause. Then Linda turned to Ava. "They're patching us through to his assistant." Ava's breath caught in her throat, her heart thudded in her ears. This was it, the moment she had waited for, the moment the truth would finally be heard. And as the line clicked and the voice of her father's executive assistant came through, Ava stood taller, stronger. No more doubt. It was time the plane and everyone on it knew exactly who she was. "Hello, this is Miss Prescott," the voice on the other end of the line said, crisp and authoritative. "How may I assist you?" Linda spoke with calm precision. "We have a young passenger on board, Ava Carter. She's claiming to be Mr. Jackson Carter's daughter. There's been a situation. She's requested urgent verification." "May I confirm this with you?" There was a brief pause and then, "One moment, please. Mr. Carter is currently in a board meeting, but if it's urgent, I'll have him interrupted." Ava's chest tightened. Even just hearing Prescott's voice gave her hope, but also reminded her how far out of control things had spun. She wasn't supposed to be standing in the galley defending her name. She was supposed to be halfway through a documentary about sea turtles. Seconds stretched like minutes. Then Miss Prescott returned. We're getting Mr. Carter now. Hold, please." Ava closed her eyes for a moment, holding her breath. A click. A change in tone. Ava came, her father's voice unmistakable, deep, urgent, and full of concern. "Are you okay? What's going on?" The moment she heard him, her composure cracked. "Dad," she said, voice tight with tears. "They said my ticket was fake. They said I didn't belong in first class. They wouldn't let me call you, and one of them grabbed me. There are bruises on my arm. I tried everything to prove I'm your daughter, but they wouldn't listen." There was silence on the line, and then Jackson Carter's voice came back simmering with rage. I showed them the itinerary you sent me. Screenshots, ID, but they wouldn't believe me. I want to speak to the flight attendant, right now." Ava handed the phone to Linda without hesitation. "Mr. Carter," she said, holding the receiver to her ear. "This is Linda Harrison, lead flight attendant. First, let me say I'm so sorry. I wasn't aware of what was happening until a few moments ago." "Yes, sir. I understand. Of course, I'll pass you over to the gate agent involved." She turned to Reynolds. Mr. Carter would like a word. Reynolds, who had shrunk into himself ever since the passenger lawyer made his announcement, now looked positively pale. His hand trembled slightly as he took the receiver. "Mr. Carter, this is Gary Reynolds. Yes, I'm the one who initiated the passenger review. We had a security concern regarding the authenticity of her documents, and I followed." "Yes, sir." "Yes, I understand. No, we had no prior knowledge she was related to." "Yes, I hear you." He flinched, recoiling, as though the voice on the line had struck him. I deeply apologize. It was never my intention to." "Yes, sir. Absolutely. I understand." He looked like he might melt into the floor. Sandra, standing nearby, looked queasy. Her eyes flicked from Reynolds to Ava, then back to the galley door. Linda took the phone back. "Understood, Mr. Carter. We'll ensure Ava is treated with the utmost respect from this moment forward." She hung up gently, then turned toward Ava. "Your father has made his position extremely clear. You are to be treated as a VIP for the remainder of the flight, and he's already initiated a full internal review." Ava said nothing at first. She was still holding her bruised arm, her knuckles white from gripping her phone. But then slowly her voice returned. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I didn't want any of this. I just wanted to take a trip." Linda gave her a soft, sympathetic look, "And you should have been able to, without being questioned, cornered, or hurt." Reynolds tried to salvage the moment, addressing the passengers beyond the curtain. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for any confusion or disturbance. There was a brief issue regarding a boarding discrepancy that has now been resolved." His voice was smooth, almost performative, but the cabin didn't buy it. "She was dragged, someone called from first class. That wasn't a brief issue. We saw what happened. You called her a liar," another said. "You dismissed her. That's not confusion. That's discrimination." Sandra stepped forward, her voice brittle. "We were simply following procedure. Your procedure involves bruising a teenage girl." A woman from 2C snapped. Reynolds looked around, clearly losing the room. Ava stood still for a moment, then walked back to her seat. Passengers stepped aside to let her pass. Some patted her arm gently. One woman gave her a chocolate bar wrapped in tissue paper. The lawyer in 1A gave her a subtle nod of respect. She sank into seat 3A again, staring out the window. Sunlight glinted off the wing. It was finally quiet, and yet everything had changed. The hum of the aircraft returned to the foreground as Ava sat motionless in her seat, still trying to process everything that had just happened. Her fingers gently rubbed the forming bruise on her upper arm, a stark reminder of how quickly things had spiraled. Around her, the cabin remained unusually quiet, filled with the tension of aftershock. Conversations were hushed, stolen glances passed, and phones buzzed silently in laps. The story had already begun to travel beyond these cabin walls. Linda reappeared a few minutes later, walking slowly and purposefully. In her hand was an ice pack, and in her expression a look of genuine concern. "For your arm," she said, gently kneeling slightly to Ava's eye level. "And for everything else." "Thank you," Ava murmured, accepting the pack. The cold was sharp at first, but it dulled the ache. She pressed it in place and nodded. "You didn't have to step in like you did, but I'm really glad you did." Linda's lips curved in a tight, sad smile. "I've been with this airline for 20 years. I know what it's supposed to stand for. I couldn't stand by and watch it be dragged through the dirt, especially not by people who were more concerned with their pride than their duty." She gave Ava a pat on the shoulder and returned to her duties, while Ava sat in reflective silence, absorbing those words. Moments later, Eric passed by and paused beside her row. He looked awkward, almost like he didn't know whether he should speak or simply fade into the background. "Miss Carter," he began, keeping his voice low. I'm sorry I didn't do more sooner. I saw what was happening and I froze." "It's no excuse. I just that Reynolds outranks me." "But I should have stepped in anyway." Ava studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "You did try," she said, "when it counted most." Eric looked surprised, grateful. He nodded once solemnly and continued down the aisle. Outside the window, the sky was endless and blue. Ava leaned her head back and closed her eyes. The adrenaline had begun to wear off, replaced by a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity. She knew now that this moment, the confrontation, the injustice, the vindication would follow her long after the flight landed. She was trending. That much was clear. Her phone still in airplane mode, but connected to Wi-Fi pulsed with message alerts and notification banners. A quick glance showed her name appearing in hashtags. #Justice for Ava, #Skybridge Scandal, #She belongs here. Somehow, even without saying a word publicly, she had become the symbol of something much larger than herself. Ava wasn't sure how to feel about that. She tried to focus on the present, the rest of the flight, the little victories. Her seat remained hers. Her truth had been believed. Her father had spoken up for her swiftly and without hesitation. And yet, she still ached. Not just from the bruise on her arm, but from the emotional toll, the humiliation, the violation of her dignity, the disbelief in her voice being enough. It wasn't fair that she had to be the daughter of a CEO to be taken seriously. She thought of all the young women like her who didn't have that safety net, that level of visibility, that power in their corner. How many of them were dismissed, dragged, silenced? The question sat heavily on her chest. The captain came over the intercom, his voice crisp and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've reached cruising altitude and expect a smooth journey to Los Angeles. On behalf of Skybridge Airlines, we apologize for any earlier inconveniences and thank you for your understanding." The message was vague, deliberately so. But the passengers understood exactly what he was referring to. Glances were exchanged. Heads nodded. A few passengers clapped softly, an unusual gesture, but Ava knew what it meant. They were with her. As the hours passed, she drifted between restless naps and half-watched movies. She tried to eat, but had no appetite. Her mind replayed the events on a loop from the moment she stepped through the gate to the moment she heard her father's voice on the phone. By the time the captain announced their descent into LAX, the cabin was a patchwork of fatigue, reflection, and unspoken alliances. Linda knelt beside her seat once more. "Miss Carter," she said softly, "your father contacted me again. He said the press got wind of what happened. There may be reporters at the airport. He's arranged for a private escort to meet you at the gate in case you'd prefer a quieter exit." Ava's eyes widened slightly. "It's gotten that big already," Linda nodded solemnly. "A few videos of the incident are already circulating, some with over 500,000 views. People are upset, rightfully so." Ava didn't respond right away. Then she said, "I just want to see my dad." Linda gave a gentle squeeze to her hand. "You will. We'll make sure you get there safely." As the wheels touched down in Los Angeles, Ava felt the thrum of the jet through her bones, an anchor pulling her back into reality. But this time, she wasn't afraid. Whatever storm awaited her outside that aircraft door, she wasn't walking into it alone. The plane taxied slowly across the tarmac, the golden California sun glinting off the wing as it eased to a stop at the gate. A familiar sense of restlessness stirred among the passengers as they reached for overhead bags and unfastened seatbelts. But Ava remained seated as instructed. Her hands rested in her lap, her phone clutched tightly between them, screen dimmed yet constantly buzzing. Linda appeared one last time, a steady presence amidst the commotion. "Your escort will meet you at the jet bridge. Please remain here until we guide you out," she said. Ava nodded silently. One by one, the other passengers began to disembark. Many paused beside her, offering quiet words of encouragement. "You handled yourself with grace. We're proud of you. You didn't deserve that." An older woman slipped her a business card. "My brother's a journalist at the Los Angeles Times. If you ever want your side told properly, call him." Ava gave soft thank yous, unable to form more than that. The cabin emptied slowly, the space growing quieter with every departing step. Finally, Linda motioned toward the aisle. Ready, Ava stood, her legs sore, her heart pounding. She followed Linda to the door, where a uniformed airport security officer waited. "Miss Carter," he greeted with professional calm. "I'm Officer Patel. Your father is waiting in the private lounge. I'll escort you there now." As they stepped onto the jet bridge, Ava felt the world tilt again, only this time it wasn't turbulence. Flashes exploded as the terminal came into view. Reporters stood behind a security barricade, camera lenses, raised microphones extended. They shouted questions in a frenzy. "Ava, what happened on the flight? Will you be suing Skybridge Airlines? Did your father know you were being mistreated?" Security kept the crowd at bay, but the noise and pressure were real. Ava kept her head down, her eyes focused forward, following Officer Patel's lead until they slipped behind a side door into a quiet corridor. The change was immediate. No cameras, no shouting, just the muffled hum of a private space designed to shield high-profile passengers from the public eye. And there, standing near the entrance of the private lounge, was Jackson Carter. He was still in his tailored suit, but his tie had been loosened, and the usual commanding sharpness in his posture was softened by worry. The moment he saw Ava, he moved fast, arms open, expression undone. "Ava," he said, pulling her into his chest. "Oh my God, are you okay?" She didn't answer immediately. She just sank into his embrace and held on, the tears threatening to break free once again. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his hand gently touching her bruised arm. "I saw the videos. I saw what they did to you. I don't care if you were my daughter or not. That behavior was inexcusable." Ava finally pulled back, blinking away emotion. "They didn't care who I was. And they didn't want to hear it." He led her to the nearest couch, seating her with care. "I've already launched an internal investigation," he said. "Reynolds and Sandra have been called to headquarters. HR and legal are involved. They will be held accountable." Ava exhaled shakily. "I didn't want this to be a media circus. I just wanted to go on vacation." "I know," Baby Jackson said, "but now the whole world knows what happened, and what we do next matters not just for you, but for everyone watching." He reached for her hand and gave it a reassuring squeeze. "I've already spoken to PR. We're controlling the narrative. But I want you to decide. Do you want to speak publicly, or do you want us to shield you as much as possible?" Ava was quiet for a long moment. Her phone buzzed again. Texts from Monica, her best friend, messages from classmates, DMs from strangers she'd never met, but who were already calling her brave. "I don't know yet," she said finally. "I don't want this to define me. But maybe it could mean something more." Jackson smiled, proud but cautious. "Whatever you choose, I've got your back." Just then, Linda stepped into the room, standing a respectful distance away. Jackson rose to meet her and extended his hand. "You must be Linda Harrison. Thank you for helping my daughter. I won't forget that." Linda shook his hand, visibly relieved. "I tried to do what was right. I'm sorry it went so far before I got involved." "You did more than most," Jackson replied sincerely, "and trust me, that matters." With that, Linda nodded to Ava one last time. Stay strong. You've already shown the world more courage than most adults ever manage. Ava gave a faint smile. Thank you, Linda. As the door closed behind the flight attendant, Ava let out a deep breath she hadn't realized she was holding. What now? She asked quietly. Jackson leaned back. Now we decide how we fight this with truth, with integrity, and with your voice if you're ready. Ava looked out the window, sunlight warming the glass. She wasn't ready for everything, but she was ready for the next step. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Ava had barely unpacked her suitcase before her name became a headline. Clips from the flight, grainy cell phone videos capturing every humiliating detail spread like wildfire across social media. The footage showed Sandra grabbing her wrist, Reynolds yanking her toward the galley, and Ava's face stunned and indignant as she demanded to call her father. There was no mistaking the truth. A teenage girl had been targeted, doubted, and physically manhandled for daring to sit in the seat she rightfully owned. Skybridge Airlines, under the direct command of Jackson Carter, moved quickly. Press releases were issued. A formal apology was drafted. Reynolds and Sandra were both suspended, pending internal investigation. But the world outside didn't wait for due process. The hashtags kept trending. #Justice for Ava, how she belongs. In first, a Skybridge scandal. Think pieces sprang up overnight. Civil rights activists weighed in. TV anchors debated. Online forums buzzed with outrage and support. And through it all, Ava stayed quiet, watching, absorbing, healing. Until one morning, as sunlight streamed into her bedroom and another flood of notifications lit up her screen, she turned to her father and said, "I think I'm ready to speak." Jackson didn't pressure her. He simply nodded, called the PR team, and made arrangements. They kept it simple, a single video. No elaborate lighting, no carefully worded scripts. Just Ava seated in a chair, her voice clear and steady. She told her story from beginning to end, what she felt, what she feared, and why it mattered. She didn't name-call. She didn't accuse. She simply told the truth. "I didn't ask to be the daughter of a CEO," she said near the end. "And it shouldn't take being the daughter of a powerful man to be believed. What happened to me could have happened to any other girl. And maybe if people hadn't filmed it, maybe if I didn't have someone to call, I'd be the one who got kicked off that flight." Silenced. Forgotten. That's what scares me most. The video exploded. Millions watched, millions shared, news outlets re-aired it, celebrities commented in support, and passengers from that flight came forward, some to provide witness statements, others to apologize for not speaking up sooner. Skybridge Airlines launched a full investigation. Within a week, both Reynolds and Sandra were officially terminated. The internal report cited gross misconduct, racial profiling, and excessive use of force. Jackson Carter made another public statement standing beside Ava at the company headquarters. "What happened to my daughter is unacceptable," he said firmly. "Not just because she is my daughter, but because she is a human being who deserved dignity. We built Skybridge on the idea that we bridge differences, not deepen them. We failed, and we will not allow it to happen again." Ava stood beside him, silent but strong. As the days passed, other stories began to emerge. A former flight attendant came forward, sharing that Reynolds had been written up twice before for aggressive behavior at boarding gates. Another woman posted about being interrogated by him at a different airport after wearing a hoodie and traveling alone. The pattern was undeniable. Sandra, facing mounting scrutiny, issued a public statement. "I was following the lead of a senior employee," she wrote, "but I now recognize that I should have stopped and questioned what we were doing. I was wrong." Ava didn't respond directly. She didn't need to. Her story had already done the speaking. By the end of the month, Skybridge announced a sweeping overhaul of its employee training programs. New modules focused on implicit bias, de-escalation tactics, and cultural sensitivity were rolled out across every department. Jackson Carter personally visited several training sessions, sharing Ava's story as part of the new curriculum. In private, he asked Ava if she'd want to join him at one of the sessions. "Not yet," she said, "but maybe one day." Outside the public eye, Ava returned to the life she'd almost lost hold of. College applications, summer plans, late-night FaceTimes with Monica. The bruise on her arm faded faster than the memory in her mind, but both remained. Sometimes at odd moments, brushing her teeth, tying her shoes, she'd recall the flash of disbelief in Sandra's eyes, the way Reynolds had grabbed her, like she didn't matter, the passengers turning to watch her as if she was something dangerous. But then she'd remember something else too, the woman who'd yelled, "You can't do that to her," the lawyer who threatened to sue. Linda placing a tissue in her hand, her father storming through the noise, saying, "Stay put. I've got this." That's what stayed with her the longest. She hadn't been alone. Ava learned something that summer, something deeper than any classroom could have taught. She learned that power wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was a quiet refusal to shrink. A single word said with clarity. A moment where you stood still and didn't let them move you. She hadn't set out to make a statement, but she had. And now the world was listening. Weeks after the incident, life around Ava Carter slowly resumed a rhythm, if not the same rhythm as before, at least a new one she could live with. The media storm had begun to fade, though her name was still brought up in discussions about racial profiling and customer rights. College brochures arrived in the mail again. Monica sent her playlists. The world in its relentless way kept spinning. But the effects of what happened to her continued to ripple. Emails poured in, some from strangers, others from girls her age who had gone through similar experiences but hadn't had the platform or the voice. One message read, "I saw what they did to you, and it reminded me of when I was 12 and got followed through a department store. I never said anything back then. But because of you, I finally told my parents." Ava read every message. She replied to as many as she could. One evening, as she sat in the living room, her father walked in holding a tablet. "I want to show you something," he said, voice warm but serious. He pulled up a training video. There on the screen was a Skybridge orientation session for new employees. At one point, the instructor paused the slideshow and played a video clip. It was footage from Ava's incident used as a case study on what not to do. The room on screen was quiet. The trainees watched, jaws clenched, brows furrowed. Then the instructor said, "This passenger Ava Carter was treated unfairly, not because of policy, but because people saw her and assumed. That ends here. If you don't believe that dignity belongs to every single person on this aircraft, you're not fit to wear this uniform." Jackson paused the video. They play this on day one now. Across every Skybridge location, this is the new standard. Ava said nothing at first, then she whispered, "I didn't expect it to go this far." "You didn't expect it," her father said, "but you earned it." She smiled faintly. "I still think about the people who spoke up on the plane. That woman in economy, the guy in 1A, even Eric. They didn't have to say anything, but they did." Jackson nodded. Courage is contagious. Later that night, Ava opened her laptop. She wasn't sure what had prompted her curiosity maybe, or the sense that some doors once opened should never be left ajar. She clicked New Document and typed "the seat I fought for." It wasn't a press statement. It wasn't even a full story yet. Just fragments, feelings, descriptions of what it felt like to be doubted in public, to have your identity questioned in front of strangers, to be rescued not by rank or privilege, but by resolve. She wrote about the hum of the plane, the sting of Reynolds's grip, the sharp, cold stillness in Sandra's voice. And then she wrote about Linda's tissue, the woman who shouted, "That's discrimination," the lawyer's voice calm but fierce, "You're violating her rights." She didn't know if it would become a published essay or a private memory, but the act of writing it made something shift in her. The memory stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like armor. A few days later, Skybridge invited Ava to speak at a private gathering of senior staff. It wasn't publicized, and there would be no cameras. Just a conversation, a room full of people in suits, directors, regional managers, training supervisors, many of whom had never faced the kind of scrutiny Ava had survived. She wore a simple white blouse and black slacks, no makeup, no script, just her voice. "I'm not here because I want revenge," she told the room. "I'm here because I believe you want this company to be better, and I think you can be, but only if you start asking different questions. Not just what are our policies, but what are our assumptions? Who do we believe without proof? Who do we challenge without reason?" The room was silent. A few heads nodded. When she finished, Jackson stood beside her, not as CEO but as father. "She's the reason we're making this change," he said. Not because she's my daughter, but because she made us look in the mirror. Later that evening, back at home, Ava stepped out onto the patio. The sun was setting, casting streaks of orange and lavender across the sky. Her phone chimed again, a message from Monica. "Did you see you're in time? Magazine's 30 under 30, Voices of Change." Ava chuckled softly, then looked up at the sky. She didn't feel like a symbol. She didn't feel like a movement. She just felt like herself, someone who refused to be moved from her seat. And somehow that had been enough to move the world. Months passed. Ava Carter moved forward, but she never moved on. She began her senior year of high school with a slightly different air about her. It wasn't arrogance or defiance, it was clarity. She walked the halls with quiet confidence, the kind you gain when you've been through fire and didn't let it consume you. Some students stared, others whispered, and a few, mostly those she never expected, came up to her between classes just to say they were proud. Some even asked for advice. She wasn't trying to be anyone's hero, but she had become something just as powerful, an example. Occasionally, she'd still be stopped in grocery stores or at the airport. People strangers would approach with soft eyes and sincere voices. "I showed your video to my daughter. Thank you for standing up. You gave me courage." One day during her college essay prep class, the instructor asked them to write about a moment that changed them. Some wrote about losing a loved one. Others wrote about overcoming fear, falling in love, failing and learning. Ava paused for a long time, then began to type. Her essay wasn't about the incident itself. It was about the moment before it. That second when she stood in the aisle, eyes burning, knees shaking, voice cracking, and still said, "I have a right to be here." She wrote about what it meant to speak when you're expected to be silent, to assert value when the world tries to assign you none, to hold your ground figuratively and literally when everything around you is trying to move you. And she ended it with a line she hadn't planned, but that came to her like an exhale. "They questioned whether I belonged in that seat. But the truth is, I never left it." That essay earned her admission into her top choice school. Not just because of what she wrote, but because of what she represented. Ava didn't stop there. She started a blog, a quiet one at first, where she shared reflections on race identity, travel, and the power of presence. She called it Gate A3, a nod to the original flight's boarding gate, the last moment before the storm. Her posts weren't always heavy. Some were about books. She loved music that got her through long nights, travel tips for solo flyers. But every now and then she'd share something raw, like how she sometimes still flinched when an authority figure raised their voice, or how complicated it was to forgive someone who never truly apologized. And people listened. She built a following not for drama, but for truth. Meanwhile, Skybridge Airlines continued its reform, not just in training manuals, but in culture. Anonymous reporting channels were created. Employee reviews now included ratings on empathy and de-escalation. Jackson Carter didn't just respond as a father, he responded as a leader. He told board members, "If we only act when our families are harmed, we've failed. We must act because it's right always." Internally, some resisted. Quiet complaints, grumblings that the company was overcorrecting. But the numbers didn't lie. Customer satisfaction improved. Employee turnover dropped, and Skybridge became a case study in crisis response that led to actual change, not just press statements. Ava watched all this unfold from the outside, not with pride or ownership, but with hope. And yet there were days she still woke with a lump in her throat. Days when she replayed that flight in her head, wondering if she'd done enough, said enough, or maybe said too much. Healing wasn't linear, justice wasn't clean, but she kept moving. On the anniversary of the incident, a large envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a letter on heavy stationery. It was from the woman who had shouted from economy class that day. Her name was Maria Ortega, a social worker from San Diego. She wrote, "I never forgot you. I think about that flight often. I think about how I almost didn't say anything. How I sat there for a second frozen. And then I thought, what if that were my niece, my student me? You gave me the push I needed. And I want you to know I've since spoken up in 2 more situations where someone was being treated unfairly. I'm not a loud person, but that day, you gave me a voice." Ava sat at her desk holding the letter, eyes brimming. She hadn't just made noise, she had created echoes. And sometimes that's all it takes. Not to change the world in one stroke, but to set something in motion. A ripple, a wave, a girl who stays in her seat, a lawyer who presses record, a father who answers the phone. A flight that should have been ordinary turned into a reckoning. A moment of cruelty answered by a chorus of truth. A story no longer just hers, but a light for others still waiting to be seen. Ava Carter closed her laptop and stepped outside into the sunlight. She wasn't just flying anymore, she was soaring. As her high school graduation approached, Ava Carter stood on the edge of one chapter closing and another just beginning. Her story, once confined to the cabin of a single flight, had now reached audiences she could never have imagined. University deans, civil rights leaders, magazine editors, and even airline executives from rival companies had referenced her case in speeches and policies. But to Ava, it was never about the headlines. It was about being heard. When her school counselor asked if she wanted to be considered for valedictorian, Ava hesitated. Not because she didn't qualify, she did with near-perfect grades and a slate of extracurriculars, but because she wasn't sure she wanted the attention again. "I think you already gave the most important speech of your life," the counselor smiled. "But maybe this time the spotlight is yours by choice." Ava thought about that and said yes. On graduation day, she stood in front of hundreds of peers, faculty and families, wearing her navy gown and a gold tassel that shimmered in the sunlight. As she approached the podium, she glanced at the front row. Her father was there, of course seated beside Monica, both beaming with pride. Somewhere in the back, Linda had quietly slipped in after being invited as a guest. She wore no uniform this time, just a soft blue dress and tears in her eyes. Ava took a breath and began. "I used to think strength meant never being shaken, never crying, never stumbling, but I've learned something else. Strength," she said, "is when your hands are shaking. Your heart is racing, and your voice still rises anyway." The crowd was silent, locked in. I sat in seat 3A on flight 806. I was told I didn't belong there, that I had no right. And I almost believed them, but instead I stayed. I spoke, and because of that, others spoke too. Some people think courage is loud and bold, but sometimes courage is just not moving when every force around you is trying to push you away. Applause began slow and swelling. She smiled, finishing, "This diploma says I'm graduating, but what I really earned this year, what we all earned, is the reminder that we are never powerless. Not when we speak, not when we stand, not even when we're sitting quietly in a seat that we know we've earned." The crowd rose to their feet. After the ceremony, a line of students, parents, and teachers waited to speak with her. But as she made her way through the crowd, she felt a tap on her shoulder. It was Eric, the young flight attendant from that flight. He looked different out of uniform, a little older, more grounded somehow. "I've thought about that flight every day," he said. "I left Skybridge 2 months after. I needed to figure out who I wanted to be. I'm starting a training course next week. Anti-bias education for airport staff." Ava blinked, touched. "You didn't have to come." "I did," he replied, "because you stayed in your seat, and I didn't, and I want to do better." She reached out, shook his hand, and whispered, "Thank you." Not long after, Ava received an invitation, this time from the U.S. Department of Transportation. They were organizing a nationwide initiative, Fair Skies, a task force to reevaluate air travel standards for passenger dignity and racial equity. They wanted Ava to consult as a youth representative. She wasn't sure if she'd say yes, but the fact that they asked meant the world was still shifting. She continued writing. Her blog, Gate A3, now had tens of thousands of readers. She published pieces about systemic assumptions, quiet resistance, and the power of strangers who decide to care. One of her posts, "When the cabin isn't safe, find your voice anyway," was picked up by The Atlantic. Another "My seat wasn't a gift. It was a right," was taught in several high school ethics courses. Ava's story became more than an event. It became a catalyst, not because she intended to lead a movement, but because she stayed rooted when the world tried to displace her. And even as new challenges awaited her, college public speaking, deciding what kind of future she wanted to build, she carried one certainty with her. She didn't change the world by shouting. She changed it by staying. She stayed calm. She stayed grounded. She stayed in her seat. And the world finally had to move around her. By the fall, Ava had officially moved into her college dorm. The university, one of the top-ranked liberal arts institutions on the West Coast, had offered her not only a scholarship but a chance to design her own first-year seminar on social justice and public voice. It was an opportunity she hadn't expected but couldn't ignore. She titled the course Claiming the Seat Personal Identity in Public Spaces. 10 students enrolled. Some were activists. Others were just curious. All of them had watched the video of Ava on Flight 806 at some point, and now sat across from her in a sunlit seminar room where she wasn't just a symbol anymore. She was their peer, their guide, their fellow explorer of what it meant to hold space and be seen. Each week, they discussed case studies from Rosa Parks to lesser-known stories of displaced voices. But Ava didn't want it to be a class about heroism. She wanted it to be about choices. The small ones, the quiet ones, the ones that ripple. You don't have to be loud to be powerful, she told them in week 3. You just have to refuse to disappear. Meanwhile, her blog continued to grow. She turned some of her most resonant posts into a short ebook, Turbulence Lessons from Seat 3A. To her surprise, it landed on a few bestseller lists in the civic memoir category. Schools began requesting permission to distribute it in classrooms. A producer even reached out about adapting the story into a limited docu-series. Ava took it all in stride. Fame wasn't the point, change was. She began giving talks, short keynote speeches at high schools' libraries, youth conferences. At one conference in Atlanta, a group of girls approached her afterward, all wearing handmade t-shirts that read, "I stay in my seat." They hugged her tightly, all talking at once. "You made me brave. My mum cried when I showed her your video. I didn't think anyone would believe me, but then I remembered you." Ava smiled through it all, heartful and humbled. At home, Jackson Carter watched from the sidelines. He no longer appeared in front of cameras on her behalf. Ava didn't need that anymore. But every now and then, when she was home for break, they would sit together in the kitchen after midnight, sharing tea and silence. "You've made this company better," he told her once. "And me too." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I didn't set out to fix anything," she said. "I just wanted to be treated like a person." "You reminded us all what that looks like," he said. Skybridge, Airlines had changed in ways that even Jackson hadn't anticipated. Flight attendants now carried discreet info cards reminding passengers of their rights. A rotating advisory board, half of whom were regular flyers like Ava, met quarterly to assess conduct and training. Ava was offered a seat on that board. She accepted, but only on the condition that it would always include at least one seat for someone under the age of 25. "We can't talk about the future," she said, "if we're not willing to let them speak." One evening, while flying home from a university panel in Denver, Ava booked herself a ticket in economy intentionally. She didn't want perks. She wanted perspective. The man beside her, an older gentleman with kind eyes, struck up a conversation. Eventually he asked, "Do I know you from somewhere? You look familiar." She smiled. "I was in the news once." "Good or bad?" he asked, chuckling. "I stayed in my seat," she said simply. He blinked, then his mouth opened in recognition. "Wait, you're her, from the flight. That story, my granddaughter made us all watch it. We talked about it for days." They flew the rest of the way in companionable silence. As the plane landed and the flight attendant welcomed them to New York, Ava looked out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. She was older now, calmer, stronger, still healing, always learning, but most of all, still seated. Not in defiance, but in quiet, unwavering presence. The world had tried to take her place. She claimed it, and never let go. By winter of her first college year, Ava Carter had quietly become one of the most influential young voices in a growing movement around dignity in public spaces. Not just on planes, but in classrooms, at banks, in boardrooms, on sidewalks, anywhere. People were asked either subtly or violently to justify their presence. She didn't lead marches or shout into megaphones. That wasn't her style. Instead, she continued to do what she had done that day on Flight 806. She stayed. Present, clear, steady. When an Ivy League university invited her to speak at a symposium on race privilege and the power of ordinary resistance, Ava agreed on one condition. No big stages, she told the organizer, no spotlight. Instead, they set up the event in a circular forum. No podium, no raised platforms, just chairs. Everyone sat at the same level. When Ava entered the room, the moderator introduced her with a single line, "You know her story. But today you'll hear her voice." Ava began without notes. "I've been asked a lot about what I felt that day. Fear, anger, shame, all of it, yes. But what I remember most," she said, "was the sound of the curtain behind me. That moment when they dragged it back and every passenger could see what was happening. That sound, shriek, like the opening of a stage play. But this wasn't fiction, it was me." She paused. I realized in that moment that the question wasn't just whether I belonged in that seat. It was whether I belonged in view, whether I was allowed to be seen in my fullness, my identity, my resistance, my truth. The audience was silent, leaning in. Ava continued, "It's easier to believe in justice when it stays behind the curtain, when it's a rumor, a complaint. He said, she said. But once it's visible, it changes everything." That night after the symposium, she was approached by a faculty member who had been silent during the entire session. He introduced himself, then hesitated. "My daughter, she's 10. And black. And brilliant. I think about her traveling one day by herself. Your story, what you did, it gives me hope." Ava smiled. "She won't be alone. She'll have voices behind her. Echoes." He nodded, holding back emotion. "Thank you." That spring, Skybridge Airlines reached out again, not for a press event, not for strategy. This time, they invited Ava to help design a new first flight program for teenage solo travelers. It was meant to provide extra guidance and visibility for minors traveling alone, especially young girls and passengers from underrepresented communities. Ava helped shape it from scratch. She made sure the language was empowering, not patronizing. She suggested the creation of a digital seat companion, a QR code card in the seatback that solo passengers could scan to access information, emergency contacts, and a video from Ava herself. In the video, she looked straight into the camera and said, "If you're watching this, you're on a journey not just in the air, but in who you are. If someone makes you feel like you don't belong here, remember this, you do. You earned this seat, and no one gets to take that from you." The program rolled out quietly. No commercials, no marketing campaign, just action. And within months, it was adopted by 2 other airlines. Ava's influence continued to grow in ripples. She was featured in a Time article titled, "The Next Rosa Parks No Meet Ava Carter, and Let Her Be the First of Herself." She appeared briefly on a late-night show, but kept the conversation grounded. "I'm not a symbol," she said. "I'm just someone who stayed." Meanwhile, back on campus, Ava lived like most students. She studied late, stressed over deadlines, got coffee with friends. But the campus always seemed to pause a little when she walked by. Not out of fame, but out of respect. She had become a mirror, a reminder of stillness, of power, of staying visible. One afternoon, she walked into the campus library and noticed a flyer on the community board. It advertised a panel called "Own Your Seat, Ava Carter, and the Power of Presence." She hadn't organized it. A group of freshmen had. She smiled and left a sticky note beneath it, "See you there. I'll be sitting front row." The panel was held in a modest lecture hall with creaky floors and mismatched chairs, the kind of room where revolutions don't announce themselves, but quietly begin. When Ava arrived, the space was already buzzing. Students filled every seat. Some sat on the floor. A few faculty members lined the back wall, arms crossed, eyes curious. The organizers, a group of first-year students who had never met Ava until now, had prepared carefully. The panel wasn't about her story directly. It was about space, who owns it, who is given it, and who is forced to fight for it. Ava took her seat in the front row, just as promised. No stage, no spotlight, just voices. As the panel unfolded, students shared their own stories, being followed in department stores, being silenced in classrooms, being misgendered or dismissed in medical settings. Their voices shook sometimes. Other times they rang like bells. And Ava sat still listening. When the moderator finally invited her to speak, she stood slowly, brushed invisible dust from her jeans, and walked to the center, not behind a podium, just amid them. "I want to thank you," she said, looking out at the room, "because I've told my story 100 times now. But tonight I got to hear yours, and that's what matters." She paused, then added, I didn't become powerful when I was believed. I was already powerful. The belief just made it visible. There was something in her voice, an ache, but also a charge. The audience leaned forward. You don't have to go viral to matter. You don't need millions of views to deserve to be seen. Sometimes the most radical act is to take up space, not with noise, but with presence. She looked at a student in the front row, wearing a hijab, nodding softly. Another in a wheelchair with stickers all over their lap desk. A tall boy with painted nails who had been nervously twisting his fingers all evening. I see you, Ava said. And if someone ever tries to push you out of your seat, don't ask for permission to stay. Just stay. Applause rose not loud, not chaotic, but resonant, like a heartbeat shared by a room full of people who finally felt something loosen in their chests. After the event, students formed a line not for autographs, but for conversations. I've been afraid to speak up in class. But maybe now, I didn't think anyone would understand what happened to me until tonight. I used to think being quiet meant I didn't matter. Ava listened. She didn't rush. She didn't offer cliches. She simply received their stories with the same dignity she had once fought for. As the crowd thinned, one of the organizers approached a little breathless. We're planning to expand this into a campus group, maybe even a national network. Would you help us build it? Ava smiled. Only if I get to sit in the back sometimes and let you lead. That night, walking back to her dorm beneath a canopy of stars, Ava felt something she hadn't in a while, not just peace, but purpose. Not just recovery, but clarity. She reached her room, slipped off her shoes, and opened her laptop. Her blog inbox was full, more messages from students, readers, even a high school teacher in Mississippi asking if her essay could be part of their curriculum. She replied, "Of course. Tell them they're not alone." She looked at her own writing again, the essay, the flight, the memory that had become a movement. But she didn't read the words this time. She closed the file and opened a new one. A fresh document, a new story, titled The World After the Landing, because the flight was over now. But Ava Carter, she was still flying. There are stories that flash across our screens, loud, fleeting, consumed and forgotten by the next trending outrage. And then there are stories like Ava Carter's, not because they end in courtrooms or headlines, but because they begin in silence, in a quiet refusal to be moved, in a seat someone tries to take not by force, but by assumption. Ava's journey wasn't about fame. It wasn't even about justice in the traditional sense. It was about visibility. About saying, I am here, I earned this place, and you don't get to erase me. Her seat on that plane became more than a location. It became a metaphor for every space someone's ever had to defend: a classroom, a boardroom, a courtroom, a sidewalk, a neighborhood. Ava taught us that dignity is not something granted. It's something owned. That change doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just sits still and refuses to yield. And so as her story comes to a close for now, it leaves behind more than resolution. It leaves behind a challenge to every person watching, to every passenger in every cabin of life. What seat are you afraid to claim? What space have you been taught is not yours? What voice have you silenced before anyone else had to? This is your moment. Not to make a scene, but to make a stand. And if you ever doubt whether you deserve to be where you are, remember Ava. Remember the silence she endured. Remember the curtain that opened. Remember the voice that finally said, I belong here. And if you ever witness someone else being pushed from their place, be the voice, the camera, the arm that reaches out and says no more. Because every action matters. Every witness counts. Every seat is sacred when someone fights to stay in it. If this story moved, you don't let it stop here. Comment below and tell us what's one seat you've claimed in your life. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more true stories that reveal truth, fight injustice, and remind us of the strength inside us all. Because sometimes, all it takes to change the world is to stay in your seat. Thank you for flying with us.